Hello. So let's go over and take a look at this latest illustration that we're doing here. Um, this is gonna be kind of a homage to the NES and Super NES Metroid title games. The original kind of thought with the illustration we're working on lately was that it was gonna be like kind of like a punk style, like almost Samus Aran, but just just because quite honestly it was like I couldn't pull enough elements that weren't so derivative out. I decided to do something that was like a little bit less inspired by that character and maybe something a little more original, hopefully. But I still wanted to keep elements because they made sense from a perspective of like if this was like a devotee of like bounty hunters, what kind of things would she surround herself with? And some of those things would be like kind of maybe tattoos or symbols of like kind of famous bounty hunters in pop culture. Obviously, one of those would be Samus Aran. So, what I did is I wanted to make kind of like a stylized, almost like Latin King style tattoo that was harkened to those games, but also incorporated like more kind of what you'd see as like traditional tattoo elements, like that kind of floating crown for some reason resonates with me as a tattoo element. And so I started building things as I do with most of the vector stuff, as I've gone over in other videos, in a symmetrical format. So the left side and the right side are mirrored. Saves you on the work because you're only doing the work on the left side. And you can see here I'm just start with the outline, the big shapes, and then kind of from there is going into more detail. The idea being that in Illustrator, as you build things, the topmost things become the last thing you draw becomes the topmost thing. And when using the shape finder tool, it's really useful to do that way because then usually the item that's on the top is the one that acts upon the item below it. So where you're combining two items or subtracting, you lose the top shape, but it incorporates into the bottom shape somehow. And it doesn't always, work super intuitively. I know, as you can see, there's a lot of times when you get it backwards, and really all you have to do is reverse their order, and then Illustrator makes shape somehow, makes sense of it. And as I do with all of the illustration stuff, I try to work as few curves as I can. Just really trying to work in basic shapes. That tends to be more, what would you say, like attractive, like aesthetically pleasing, if things kind of have a clear like design shape look. And that also keeps your artboard pretty clear. And rounding corners, of course, is part of that too. Just attempting to make things look kind of friendlier. Again, not if it's somewhere that you want to look dangerous or sharp, like a corner. But for this character, we really don't. We're not trying to like these fangs. I think in the game are fairly pointed in some of the concept art, but this is more rounded because this is a friendly take on the character. Now, so we started with the bottom, and then the membrane that kind of holds the fangs and the little fang nodules. And that's where it latched on to. In the game, it latched onto that part and sucked away life. And then there's a bit that incorporates into these like striatish portions, incorporate into the body of the kind of the jellyfish style body. And inside there are these like kind of almost like nerve clusters. And the idea behind those is like, okay, I could have gone through and like specifically painted all of these and painstakingly pulled out circles for every one of these, but I felt like what might be easier, and it turned out to be a lot easier, was just to pull out these little shapes and kind of fill it with like 3 distinct sizes of these nodules. That seemed to work really well. And then simply color them all, and increase the size of the stroke. And then take that stroke, and once we had that, is expand it out. So that's what you'll see I'm doing here, is kind of arranging each of these, I guess you'd call it like a pustule almost, or like a bubble that like that's how the nerve cluster is kind of made up, these kind of bubbles. So we're going through and placing them like kind of strategically for the best effect. And then, going through it and selecting all of the same shape, stroke fill, and fill. That way, you only get what you're looking for. And then you can expand these out. And I think you see in the recording, I kind of contemplated, okay, what should I expand all these and then collapse the shapes together? But ultimately, like, that's so much work. And really, everything's already in a really good order. You don't need to do that extra work. You can see me going back and forth and being like, okay, what if I did it? And it's just not worth the pain and the effort. And then obviously, we need 3 of those. One goes on the left, one goes on the right, and then one goes in the middle. The ones on the left and right are going to be mirrored, so that's not a big deal. The one in the middle, though, needs to be unique to itself. So after taking, all of those pieces and putting them together, we just need to kind of arrange them a little bit differently. And you can see me doing that now, is just kind of building some randomness in there, so it's not the exact shape repeated, and there's some visual like difference there. And then since we figured that out, and we know we're just going to mirror the one on the left, we're going to go ahead and build out the shapes, the kind of nerve ending shapes that make up the underneath of the membrane on the outside. And those are really simple. We don't want to go like crazy into depth, so maybe just like copying them, or it just expanding that, duplicating those along the thing, and then working with that. It seemed to work pretty well. Yeah, and then I remember playing this game when I was in like middle school, the Super Nintendo version. I don't remember playing the NES version until much later. But really, what I felt about it, especially with the Super Nintendo, is like everything was so colorful. Everything was like really in your face, vibrant. The first one, I think they tried to do that too, but with 8-bit, you can only do so much. So I really wanted to try to capture that with this, and on the first pass in Illustrator, I didn't really get there, but going through Photoshop was really to pull that in. And then what you can see now is me duplicating and then joining those shapes. And I've even built in the middle there's a little oval that's going to make up the bit of shine that comes from that rounded portion of the body of the Metroid. And here I'm building out the shapes that'll make up the color fills for that. And you see it's kind of one of those things like, okay, which one's in the right area to make that work? How do I get that going the best way? And sometimes you can just use the Pathfinder tool. You can use the divide all, and that way you keep all the shapes. You just delete what you don't need. But honestly, sometimes you have to kind of just build like some throwaway shapes to fit in there. And then I'm enlarging everything, which really it behooves you, especially if this is going to go to be like a shirt or sticker, like I do with a lot of the stuff, is make sure that you've sized it up, because when you convert it to PNG or whatever to do some of the texturing, which I do quite a bit, if you've got more pixels to work with because you've sized it up in vector already, you're doing yourself a big favor. And then I'll forget to do that because it's like it looks the right size, but then you look at it and your maybe your artboard's only a couple inches by a couple inches. And so again, I want to do the crown here, but I'm going in and trying to be true to the illustration. Like I want a certain weight to the border of it, and again, we're gonna probably pull in some of those corners to be a bit softer, so that there's also a quality to the art that is true to my style. Okay, so we're continuing here, and we're going to build out the shape fill for the crown itself. And it really just sometimes this is the best way is just to build a loose outline and not worry about so much about pulling things apart and making shapes that fit exactly in each other, because you run into these really weird like Pathfinder things where it's like it just doesn't know what to do with the shape you built, or maybe you haven't you haven't really connected uh, the shape in the best way, but you're going to pixel anyway. I mean, so really the vector is just a tool to get there. And you can see here, uh, we've we're looking at um, the color version. This is kind of my end result, but I wanted to take you through it as I went through it. So it's going to go back to a completely outlined version, and you'll see how we applied the colors and how that makes sense, because obviously we're getting some gradients and some interesting like blending effects there. But I typically try to start things flat, and sometimes you'll pick colors from another piece of art, or maybe like the original piece itself. If there's like some kind of like if you're basing something on reality. Now this one's kind of just like I already had in my mind what I wanted to do, and I think this might be based off of some of the concept art for the original Metroid. Was like, yeah, we want to do that kind of green pink thing, and so that's what I'm trying to do. Is like there's a wine color that's kind of the darkest range, and then like some kind of medium pink that makes up the mid range, and then a hot pink ideally would be like the high range for that. And then the green is like a green blue, and then we're throwing in the yellow there that goes with the crown and also pulls in the fangs pretty well. And here you can see me building in the shadows as well as the highlights. And the shadows are it's really simple. You'd think, okay, well you can color, you can make a shadow that's just a shade of the color that's going to be on top of it, but really you're better served by like doing a multiply layer on that shape and then like 20% opacity or 30 or 40 or whatever, just to get the effect you're looking for. That way, really you're only worried about what the shape looks like, and that effect does the work for you. And the same thing with the 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 highlights is they're just going to be a shape that you build, and then it's going to be an opacity screen. And again, like find a color that works for like 20 or 30%. With that one, I find if sometimes the color you need to go higher to get that white look, because if you go to like 20 or 30, it's so neutral. It's like it doesn't help you get to where you're going. You know, in almost in this case, if you look here, where the opacity is, where the screen effect is, there's like it's just like that wine shade, but a couple points darker. All right, so I think what I decided here was I was pausing. Oh, I was deciding I was going to show you how to do the fill or not. All right, so looks like I was either playing with the layers or kind of deciding where to go next with it. But really what we're doing is, you can see here's the cell body just filled in with like a regular color and then duplicated over that. So we're using some multiply layers there to kind of get an interesting effect. I think it was just a standard multiply. But then what we're going to do with those is we're going to apply a gradient to them. And the reason for that is because we're looking at like kind of a transparent jelly almost, which makes up the creature's body, at least from the game, is that you can see through that. And so the two effects separately are kind of a little flat, but combining them kind of garners some interesting results. Uh, and I think this kind of a good look is, as it's more bulbous towards the middle, it's a little more light, whereas in outskirts it's darker, because as it curves, you're seeing through more layers of the cell of that piece. And then just because the look of it is pretty nice, we're trying to do some subtle-ish gradients here. I know in design school they were like the gradient is like the tool of like the the lazy artist, but it's a nice effect for what it's worth. And I'm not doing like green to blues or anything like that. I'm trying to stay in the same family. And I think that's what you really have to do if you're going to use it at all. Sometimes there's a call to do like a green to blue, but usually it's like staying the same color. So you can see here, this one has a little bit more work done to it. This is one in Photoshop, so I'm going to show you the layers here. And this is a fully textured version, but we've got is like the outline. You know, there's another layer over the outline which is blurred and then has an opacity attached to it so that it's like blurred but not quite as dark. So you'll see that here. That's the outline layer. Here's some of the cell body. And again, it's like we're going to take those two and combine them. And we did some quick erasures with some texture brushes so that, you know, it's not exact what's erased. It's like kind of like a little bit of everything. And flicking that on and off and seeing if you can see any difference. There's some texture and there's some speckles, like a standard paper texture that I add to a lot of stuff to give some further kind of refinement. There's the opacity, the screen shifts for highlights, and then there's that hot pink I was telling you about from the under layer. So we got that all on, and then we've got our kind of like shadowy border and stroke layer, and you know, we want to have that defined stroke there just because we're going for that cartoon look. And you can see that I have a vibrancy adjustment layer attached, and it takes that muted layer and pumps it up to the next section, and really gives you a good effect here. It also acts upon some of the elements like the kind of that foggy fuzz and makes them bright against the stroke, which I really liked here. You can see along the rim of the cell body and the crown, there's a really cool effect, and it really busts that crown out to like a nice shiny yellow instead of that kind of dull mustardy cream. Yeah, so that's basically it, and I felt at this point it was good to take into the full illustration, which you guys have seen before if you've seen the videos on this channel. And you can see on the upper left hand arm there's the Metroid King kind of just chilling out. And originally I thought this was going to be like a character that might be around her, like, you know, a buddy, like as in the original Super Metroid. But I felt maybe that was a little too on the nose. And you can see I just applied it on the skin there, some multiply, a an opacity shift to like 90% just so some of the skin comes through. It's a little bit more khaki colored, and some general blurring so that it looks like it's part of the skin. And then again, here's the final output. You can see on the right shoulder, there's also a little Boba Fett head, and I have another video kind of detailing how that came together. At this point, I don't know if I really can add more. There's other elements of the illustration I think I'd like to work on and get that kind of all put together and then finish it off. You know, at some point you're gonna just, there's too much visual stuff going on with the character, and it's like I feel like how she's put together as far as like the line work, it'll be too muddied if I just add too much stuff. Already there's some things that bother me, like the wing skull is kind of overlapping weirdly, and you know, I built the collarbone shadows and the lines there purposefully, so having those things come in does kind of bug me in a bit. Also, like I really like the Boba Fett tattoo, but ultimately I don't know if it makes sense because it's so out of the color scheme for everything else. It's not bright. We already have kind of the Mandalorian flag representing on the shirt, so I don't know if it's necessary. But we'll roll with it and see what we think on the final. And so the other elements come in. Definitely, it'll inform us as what we want to do there more. All right, well, that's it. Thanks so much for watching. And you know, feel free to throw a like or subscribe if that's what you feel like doing. All right, have a good one. Bye.